get angry when people don't stage door and stuff like that. But that's, again, another conversation for down the road. So again, go to BroadwayCon if you possibly can. Let's talk about more things when we get back. What was the greatest musical in Broadway, or greatest year in the Broadway musical history, so to speak? Because I've got some candidates for you that I think you might enjoy. But first, let's take a break. This is 17 from Heathers, one of my favorite shows and one of my favorite songs. Let's get it going.
More decent. When does it end? When every asshole is dead!
Fine. Or damaged. Really damaged. But that does not make us wise. We're not special. We're not different. We don't choose who lives or dies. Let's be normal. See bad movies. Sneak a beer and watch TV. We'll bake brownies or go bowling. Don't you want a life with me? Can't we be 17? That's all I want to do. If you could let me in, I could be good with you. People hurt us,
Or they vanish.
and you're right, it really blows. But we let go,
Take a deep breath.
then go buy some summer clothes. We'll go camping,
Play some poker.
and we'll eat some chili fries. Maybe prom night.
Maybe dancing.
Don't stop looking in my
Your
eyes.
eyes.
Can't we be 17? Is that so hard to do? If you could let me in, I could be good with you. Let us be 17. If we've still got the right. So what's it gonna be? I wanna be with you.
I wanna be
Oh, I love that show. Oh, I'm just going to go on a limb and say that Heathers might be one of the most underrated shows, like, of the past 10, 15 years. And that's, I think, one of my favorite songs, period, from the past 10, 15 years. Definitely one of my favorite duets out there. But, again, I could talk about Heathers for an hour and just can't do that on this podcast today. But I do have a question for you folks. What do you think was the greatest year for the Broadway musical? And obviously, I mean that literally. Like, not musical theater, because we can talk about that till the cows come home. But I'm talking about the New York theater scene, Broadway. What was the greatest year? And to kind of come up with the answer, or at least try to find a candidate for this and try to start the discussion, I created some deciding factors. I think one has to be a year that contains groundbreaking or course-changing material. You could make the case that it's either a new musical style, a new popular form, a new way to tell stories, breaking taboo subjects, things like that. So that's what I mean by that. Crossover success. That's the next deciding factor. You have to have a big musical theater year. I think you need to have a crossover success story, and there's been a number of them. So that, I think, is another deciding factor. Also, multiple quality shows which result in very, very close Tonys and and award races as well, for whether it's a Drama Desk, Outer Critics, New York Theater Critics, all that stuff. I think that's another sign of a really strong year when you have no idea who might win Best Musical that year. And you've got multiple, where it easily could go to 3, 4, maybe even all 5 nominees that year. I think that's another deciding factor. And the final one, I think timeless appeal is another important thing. I think when you look at some of these shows that have either, aged terribly, I think the mark of a strong year are musicals that have lived on and been performed multiple times, whether it is a revival on Broadway, West End productions, or just some of maybe the most popular pieces performed by colleges, high schools, and community theater groups. I think that's another deciding factor. So taking all those into consideration, I kind of went back and looked at kind of the history of Broadway musicals, and what the openings were that year and things like that. And here are the 4 years. I think I came up with 4 years. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 years that I think are my candidates for the greatest year in Broadway musical history. And look, the first is 1990-91. Some of you might be alive then. Some of you might be, well, you know exactly what I'm talking about that year. Some of you were not born then. So let me refresh your memory. In 1991, we had 4 big musicals open up that year that ended up kind of being in the Tony Hunt. The first was Miss Saigon. The second was Once on This Island. The third was The Secret Garden. And the fourth was the Will Rogers Follies. And as history would tell us, the Will Rogers Follies would ultimately win the big prize that year, Best Musical. But let's be honest, when you're looking at those 4 shows, I think in hindsight, Will Rogers Follies is like the outcast there. That's the one thing that doesn't belong. But those 3, of those 3 shows, Miss Saigon, Once on This Island, The Secret Garden, all 3 incredible productions. I don't have a bad word to say about any of them. Scores are incredible. Casting was incredible. Miss Saigon, definitely a groundbreaking show, especially when we talk about Asian representation on stage. Same thing when it comes to Once on This Island as well. And then Secret Garden, I think, was another great production. One of the last great shows that we've seen Mandy Patinkin in. Kicked off the career of Daisy Egan, who critics at Theatre Mania would now say that didn't deserve the Tony at the time, but again, topic for a different show. That's an incredibly strong year for the Broadway musical, and with the exception of the Will Rogers Follies, all 3 of those productions are massively performed all over the world. Once on the Island just won the Tony for Best Revival. One could say that the revival was better than the original production. Miss Saigon also just had a revival last year. Not as good as the original production, but still a strong revival as well. And of course, rumors are swirling about The Secret Garden coming back to Broadway, this time with Sidney Lucas of Fun Home fame attached to that project. So hopefully that will come sooner than later. Otherwise, Sidney might age out of that role. But again, I think strong year, 1991. I think when you're talking about the greatest years of Broadway theater, Broadway musical theater, 1990-91 has to be in the conversation. What's another year? Well, here it is, 1981-82. That's my next candidate. In that year, you had Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, Dreamgirls, 9, and Pump Boys and Dinettes. 4 amazing shows. Yes, I do think Joseph is a great show. I do think Joseph is one of Andrew Lloyd Webber's better productions. Doesn't get the credit it deserves when we talk about his catalog. But I think when you really take a look at the music and way it's composed and the structure and all that other stuff, it's one of his strongest works. So great show. Dreamgirls, obviously, incredible production as well. Iconic. Jennifer Holliday. Give me Jennifer Holliday any day of the week singing those songs. Incredible production. 9. Love that. I love that's one of my favorite older cast recordings to listen to with Raul Julia, who I absolutely adored growing up. Love that production. And also a great revival too with Antonio Banderas back in the 90s. But yeah, strong show there too. And then Pump Boys and Dinettes is an interesting show. I personally like the score. It's a hard show to produce if you're not a professional theater organization, because then for those of you who don't know, the musicians, they actually play the music live on stage, the actors/musicians. So it is a challenge to produce if you're not if you don't have those resources, you're not doing that show. But it's a good show, and it should definitely not be counted out. I think it's an underrated, underappreciated musical when we talk about the last 30, 40 years. But again, look at that year. I mean, that's a murderer's row. I mean, for many could probably, bump Pump Boys and Dinettes out of there, but between Nine, Dreamgirls, and Joseph and Technicolor Dreamcoat, huge, huge. So that's another candidate. The next one, I think many of you probably might disagree with, but I think 20, 30 years from now, we'll be talking about it. And that's 2016, 2017. Like I said, too soon, obviously. But when we really look at that year, here's what you had. I mean, you had Come From Away. You had Dear Evan Hansen. You had Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. And you had Groundhog Day, which I loved. I know a lot of people weren't high on it, but I thought it was good. So again, I think I would love someday to see the actual vote counts of the Tony Awards that year, because I am convinced that it was a close race in every single category. With the exception of maybe a couple, I thought representation from Great Comet, Dear Evan Hansen, Come From Away could have won any of those awards. Dear Evan Hansen obviously, won the night overall when it comes to Tonys, but Come From Away, I think, has stood the test of time. It's an amazing show. Great Comet, completely underappreciated. Train wreck of an ending to that production, but it doesn't take anything away from the quality of what that show is. And again, I think Groundhog Day is one of those shows that when we talk about production value, how you stage a show, how you choreograph a show, how do you cast a show, did so much that I don't think people realize. Incredible, incredible production. And I'll fight anybody who says differently. I ride with Groundhog Day. That's all I got to say. So I don't think, like I said, I don't think many of you will probably say that 2017 was the greatest year in Broadway musical history. But I think 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when you really see the impact and popularity of these shows explode, we will look back and say 2016, 2017 was one of the greatest years as well. My final nominee, and this might be the winner. I think a lot of people will probably say, yeah, that's it. 1959, 1960. I'm going to give you this ridiculous crop of musicals, okay? You had Once Upon a Mattress. You had The Sound of Music. You had Gypsy. You had Fiorello. And you had another musical called Take Me Along. For those of you who have never heard of Take Me Along, it starred Jackie Gleason, Walter Pidgeon, Eileen Hurley. I'm pronouncing her name probably terribly. Forgettable. I mean, I don't know any songs from it off the top of my head. Fiorello is an interesting choice based on the former New York City mayor, right? Not mayor, governor? Mayor, I think. Musical based on him. Gypsy, arguably, a lot of people may or may not disagree, arguably the greatest American musical of all time. Sound of Music, classic, gorgeous, iconic, more iconic based on the movie than let's say the original theatrical production, but iconic nonetheless. And then Once Upon a Mattress, a show that I think gets lost in the shuffle of when we talk about some of these great musicals of all time, but definitely one of the most popular shows produced today. I mean, I will venture to guess that there is definitely a high school this year doing Once Upon a Mattress. There's definitely a community theater group doing Once Upon a Mattress this year. I don't think it has the incredible statistic like Oklahoma does, where literally every single weekend somewhere in around the world, Oklahoma is being performed. I don't know if you folks knew that. That's actually a fact, which I think is absolutely ridiculous to think about. Every single weekend, all around the world, Oklahoma is being performed. Incredible. But that's an incredible year. I mean, I would agree with anybody that I think Gypsy is, if not the greatest American musical of all time, one of the top three. Sound Sound of Music, obviously, huge show. Once Upon a Mattress, again, huge show.